Hello and welcome to Shade Tree Philosophy. I'm Dave and I'm glad to see you back here. We're ready to continue on with our line study in the book of Mark, King James Version. So far we've made it through 4 chapters. We're going into chapter 5 today. And when I first started this study, I was explained that I use a few references materials, and the Harper's Bible Dictionary is a great resource. Good to have around. I've had this for years, and I used it with some of the terms that we're dealing with in today's study. So we're going to go ahead and start. So today we're doing the Gospel of Mark in the King James Version and chapter 5, and we're starting in verse 1. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. Now, I looked this up. The Gadarenes were one of the towns of the Decapolis, which was a Hellenized area that used to be actually part of Israel, but I don't know how it ended up becoming part of the Hellenized part of the Decapolis, but I know it is an area that's on the west bank, I should say on the other side of the river, of the Jordan, other side of the Jordan, from the West Bank. And but anyway, that area was given to Herod by Augustus, and he ruled that area, Herod the Great. And that's where you come into the 3 sons of Herod that came in about the time of when Jesus was in his ministry. And but anyway, Herod the Great took over this area, and this is one of the towns that he helped to found, and it was kind of an artsy town. It had a small Jewish population. Surprisingly, it was more Hellenistic, more Greek or Hellenized area, people that had been Hellenized. And interesting that Jesus would be spending a lot of time in this area. I think this was actually kind of the same area where it's not quite down by the Jordan, but it's in the southern part of the Sea of Galilee, and where John the Baptist was baptizing when Jesus came to him. So anyway, so he comes into this area of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. This is another term. Unclean, in this sense, means an evil spirit. But unclean can mean other things too, and we're going to get into that a little later. But in this sense, it is an unclean spirit. So immediately this guy met him. And so I'm going to continue. Who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him. Now, this is an interesting phrase. This is King James Version. Other versions say he came and knelt down before him, But I looked it up, and the term is prosenokeia, which was a Greek term, which meant really to have intent, to worship with intent. Other examples of this word being used was when the eunuch in the book of Acts was in Jerusalem, and Stephen, I believe it was, came up to him and was teaching him about the gospel, and the eunuch was there to worship. It says the eunuch was there in Jerusalem to worship. It's the same word, prosenokeia, I think is what it is. Let me see. It's proskuneo, I'm sorry. Proskuneo, Proskyneio, proskuneo. And so this meant to in some senses, just kneel down in front of, But in both cases, like for instance, there's another time when there was some Jews that were of great descent, and they were in the town, and they wanted to. They were in the town of Jerusalem to worship, and so the same word was used in that case too, and that's when Jesus. They came to I forget which one of the apostles and was asking to meet Jesus. These Greek Jews, I guess, is who they were, or Greeks. I think they were just Greeks. They just happened to be in town. Maybe they had converted to Judaism and had heard about Christianity, but they were in Jerusalem to worship. And if you're familiar with it, that particular time when Jesus was approached with that, Jesus goes on to say, the time has now come when all things are going to happen that he's been talking about, and that it is better that one seed falls so that, many may come of that seed, and, the faith may grow. And he's talking about to the Greeks. But anyway, the Greeks were in Jerusalem to worship. And the same word is said about this crazy man in the tombs, who's running up, and the first thing he does is, from afar off, he sees Jesus. So this guy, again, it's always the demoniacs that seem to know what's going on with Jesus. So from afar off, he comes running up. And he probably never really heard of Jesus. It's not like anyone was probably telling him, sitting down and saying, hey, you heard about this guy that's coming over from Galilee that, is teaching a new way of living that's, exciting. So I don't think that guy was getting that message. But anyway, from afar off, he comes and runs up to him, and he worships him, it says here. Verse 6, verse 7. And he cried out in a loud voice and said, what have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torture me not. For he said unto him, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. And there was nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, all the devils, mind you, not just one. All the devils besought him, saying, send us into the swine, that we may enter them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave, and the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea, that there were about 2,000 and were choked in the sea. Wow. What a scene that must have been. Number one, he gets them, and the guy's just a demoniac. So he must have been a hell of a sight. Cutting themselves with stones, running around the tombs, having already been chained and having broke the chains. I'm sure his wrists were scarred. His fingers were probably bloody. His fingernails were gone, more likely just broken off until they were bloody to the point. And, people that never bathe, their skin sometimes becomes leathery and almost doesn't seem like, I guess, I don't know if it can be restored once it gets to that point, but it can become, they can look quite different. And imagine this guy probably was not a very good sight, and probably had been, crapping and pissing all over himself, or who knows. These days, we would have locked him in a padded cell and just thrown away the key. And in this case, they tried to do something like that, but it didn't work. He kept breaking the chain, so I guess they didn't have a room they wanted to donate to the guy. But anyway, they left him out there in the tombs. And so Jesus asked him, okay, he didn't ask the fella, the man, what he wanted, did he? He asked the unclean spirit within him what was his name. Of course, it had cried out in a loud voice, what do you want with me? So anyway, so you have these many spirits in this guy. So this guy was truly must have been tormented. My hat and heart goes off to anyone who would have to deal with someone who has a multiple personality disorder or maybe is possessed. I don't know if there's a difference between the two, or there's a mix. Or, in this country we would dare not say such a thing, but who knows how many people are in the mental institutions that are suffering from things other than just maybe things that they could have controlled by being good or smarter or just better able to deal with what was coming at them in this life. And instead, they just became possessed with something that could not control them. And I do have to believe that happens to people. I know that many people probably would not, but I do believe that sometimes there is things going on that's beyond what seems to be of human nature. It seems to be of more demonic nature and something that's possesses people and makes them do things that they just wouldn't do normally. Even if they were the worst kind of people. Even the worst kind of people seem to have some sanity. I mean, there is the plea of insanity, and there are those people who are just nuts. But usually the worst kind of people are not so crazy. I don't know if you would consider Hitler crazy, but he was just an evil person. Stalin, I don't know if he would consider it a madman or not, but he's an evil person. This guy was just probably a decent person who was possessed with something that he had no control over. And so from far off, his possessor carried him along to the tombs and through his afflictions, and then brought him at the feet of Jesus and worshipped him. Interestingly enough, the demon worshipped him, not the man. Anyway, they besought him and said, "Let us go into the swine." Some people would say, well, it was punishment for the Jews who were raising the swine. But at this time, it wasn't really that strong of a Jewish province. Now, whether he said okay to the swine, because, of course, Jews weren't allowed to still eat pork. They still had the law and the holiness laws. And one of them was they couldn't eat pork. But anyway, I've heard it said, well, they were punished in some ways, and that was allowed because, it was pork. And what were those Jews doing with raising pork and having pigs? But it doesn't say that's going on here. They said they wanted to go into the pigs rather than be banished. The legion, the demons within the man would rather be in the pigs than be banished into the wasteland. So he gave them leave. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea, that were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. Just think what a mess that would be. Just the amount of dead animals in the water, which are going to have to be picked up, I guess. It's fresh water. I don't know what would they do with all those dead pigs, but anyway, that's where they ended up. And so, anyway, so the people watching them, they, I'm sure, didn't know what the heck to think. And so they're running off to the city. And they that fed the swine fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Isn't that an interesting reaction to that? That they were afraid because they saw the guy in his right mind. Maybe because they had treated him poorly. Maybe because they had tortured and tormented him in his own place. And maybe they're afraid because, I can only imagine. Why were they afraid? Just an interesting thought. But they were afraid. because they saw the man in his right mind, sitting and clothed. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. So now they hear the news about the swine. Of course, I'm sure they saw the dead pigs. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coasts. Like, man, they were not practicing hospitality any longer. Like, no, man, you got to clear out of here. And he hadn't even been there very long. Just think about it. He had just shown up on the shore, and the guy just comes running out of the tombs. And now they're telling him, get out of here, man. We don't want you here. So he did as they asked. And when he had come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Now, wouldn't you imagine you'd rather stay with Jesus than maybe the people who had tormented you in the tombs? The people had put you in chains, and I'm sure they weren't very kind to him, after a while. There's the homeless crazy guy that lives out there, keeps throwing rocks at everybody as they pass. They're probably ready to to have him meet his last few days, maybe bury him out in the tombs too. But anyway, just speculation. But when he had come into the ship, the man wanted to stay with Jesus, and howbeit Jesus suffered him not. And he saith unto him, go home to thy friends. Now, do you think the man remembers if he has any friends? The guy might be thinking, I don't have any friends. Those friends left me a long time ago. But Jesus is saying, no, don't come with me. Go home to your friends. So he may have to go back and rebuild some broken, burnt bridges. Who knows? I'm sure the guy's probably thinking, gosh, I don't know what he's thinking when he says that. But anyway, that's what Jesus told him to do. Go home to your friends. Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed and began to publish in the Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him. And all men did marvel. I imagine he made new friends, in this case, because it says he went all over the 10 cities. It says all over the Decapolis, so that means all over the 10 cities. And he was not shy about it, apparently. He says, and all men did marvel in that area. So that's great, And I hope the guy did go on to have a great life after that. Because man, oh man, it must have been horrible to be in such torture and such torment all the time. It's after you've had something happen to you, or you've been addicted, or you've had things, maybe emotional breaks, maybe psychological breaks, maybe even felt like you were possessed, and to come out of that, it really gives you a perspective that I think that is to be in some ways envied by those who have not had to go through that kind of a valley of death. I was addicted to alcohol, and lots of people have been in that boat. But I can tell you that coming out of that, it having my sanity restored, and all the cuts and bruises and things I was doing to myself, running around being possessed by these 1,000, impulses that you do when you're drinking, to be giving back your sanity from that is a great thing. And it does give you a zeal for living. And you surely don't, I can say, I surely don't mind telling people about that and sharing that part of my life, and knowing that I've been released from that kind of a burden and a true weight on me that was determining the way I was behaving from day to day, and my relationships as well. And so I'm sure this guy did go out and describe all over the 10 cities what Jesus had done for him. And amen. and praise the Lord Jesus. All right, we're at 20 minutes. And I'm glad that we had this time together. I look forward to getting back together again at the next video. And until then, you guys take care and study away. Hey.